Imagine the clash of swords, the roar of warriors, and the relentless push of Viking longships across stormy seas. Behind every raid and battle, there was another struggle often overlooked: the fight for food. What fueled these formidable fighters? How did ordinary grains, salted fish, and preserved meats power legendary feats of endurance, strength, and ferocity? From hidden storage pits in Denmark to coastal foraging in the North Atlantic, the Vikings developed strategies that kept them alive, energized, and ready for combat. This journey explores the diet that shaped warriors, the science behind their nutrition, and the practical and ritual choices that sustained campaigns across continents. Step into the world, where every bite counted, and discover how food was not just sustenance, but a key weapon in the making of a Viking warrior. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from the late 8th century with the raid on Lindisfarne in the year 793 to the mid-11th century, with the Battle of Stamford Bridge in the year 1066, was marked not only by seafaring and combat, but also by the logistical challenge of feeding warriors who demanded extraordinary amounts of energy. Studies of skeletal remains from burial sites, such as those at Trelleborg in Denmark and Birka in Sweden, have revealed tall and muscular frames, suggesting that many Viking men consumed diets that regularly exceeded 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day when engaged in physical activity. This level of intake is comparable to modern endurance athletes, and it underscores the centrality of food as fuel for military success. Barley, rye, oats, and wheat were the backbone of the Viking caloric intake. Excavations at Hedeby, one of the largest Viking trading towns located in present-day Germany, and active from around the year 800 until it was destroyed in 1066, have produced evidence of vast quantities of stored grain. This surplus was essential, not just for feeding townsfolk, but for provisioning warriors before expeditions across the North Sea. A single longship carrying about 60 men would require more than half a ton of grain to sustain a journey of several weeks. Without these rations, raiding campaigns to England, Ireland, or Francia would have been impossible. Meat and fish added further density to the Viking diet. At the site of Jorvik, the Viking city established in the year 866 what is now York, England, archaeologists have uncovered bones from cattle, pigs, and sheep showing butchery marks consistent with large-scale consumption. Combined with dried and salted fish such as herring and cod, which were abundant in the North Atlantic, this ensured a protein-rich diet capable of sustaining heavy labor. Warriors on campaign would have required not just carbohydrates, but significant amounts of protein to repair muscle tissue, strained by rowing, marching, and combat. Caloric needs were particularly intense during the summer raiding season. Accounts from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which documents Viking attacks across England between the 9th and 11th centuries, repeatedly mention long campaigns lasting from spring into autumn. Sustaining warriors during these months required forward planning. Food was stockpiled at ring fortresses such as Fyrkat and Aggersborg in Denmark, constructed under King Harald Bluetooth in the late 10th century. These sites included storage pits for grain and other provisions, revealing the administrative foresight that underpinned Viking warfare. Alcohol also provided substantial caloric content. Mead and ale, brewed from honey and grains, were not just celebratory drinks, but also sources of energy. The Gulating law from Western Norway, recorded in the 12th century but based on earlier Viking customs, even regulated the brewing of ale for communal gatherings, showing its role in daily sustenance. For warriors, consuming ale before or after battle was both a ritual act and a practical means of calorie intake, with a single liter of ale providing several hundred calories. Modern nutritional analysis has helped quantify what Viking warriors may have consumed. A 2014 study by the National Museum of Denmark estimated that an average male warrior required around 3,400 to 4,500 calories per day during a campaign. This figure would have risen even higher for berserkers, the elite shock troops described in saga literature, who fought with frenzied intensity and burned energy at an accelerated rate. Without abundant and calorie-dense food, such performances on the battlefield would have been unsustainable. The consequences of food scarcity are also visible in the archaeological record. Skeletal remains from less prosperous rural settlements in Iceland, colonized by Norse settlers beginning in the year 874, show signs of malnutrition, including stunted growth and bone lesions. These findings contrast with the healthier frames of warriors, buried with weapons and treasure, in richer sites, illustrating how caloric intake directly affected the strength and effectiveness of Viking fighters. Food as fuel was therefore not a simple matter of eating to survive. It was an organized system of production, storage, and distribution that enabled raids across thousands of miles, from the siege of Paris in 845 to expeditions as far as Constantinople, where Norse mercenaries later served as the Varangian Guard. Each of these military ventures relied on the constant replenishment of calories, without which the Viking Age itself would have looked very different. Grains formed the backbone of the Viking diet, providing steady carbohydrates that fueled both daily labor and long military campaigns. Archaeological evidence from 9th to 11th century Scandinavia shows barley, rye, oats, and wheat were widely cultivated, with barley and rye best suited to the cooler northern climate. Excavations at Ribe in Denmark, established in the early 8th century and a major trading center during the Viking Age, revealed carbonized barley and rye grains, underscoring the centrality of cereal cultivation. Wheat, while less hardy and grown in smaller quantities, was a luxury reserved for wealthier households, chieftains, and religious feasts, where its lighter bread symbolized status and refinement. Flatbreads were the most common form in which these grains were consumed. At Birka in Sweden, a key trade hub active from the mid-8th century to around 970, charred fragments of flatbreads were found in hearth deposits, indicating their regular preparation and consumption. These breads were typically unleavened, made from ground barley or rye mixed with water, flattened, and baked on heated stones or directly over open fires. Their preparation was simple yet practical, producing food that was durable, portable, and easy to eat. Flatbreads could be consumed plain, softened in broth, or used as edible plates for meat, cheese, or fish, making them indispensable for both household sustenance and warriors on campaign. Porridge was another staple, often made from barley or oats. Excavations at Hedeby, an important Viking settlement and trading post in present-day Germany that flourished from around 800 until its destruction in 1066, uncovered ceramic pots containing traces of porridge grains. This method of preparation allowed for versatile meals, which could be plain, sweetened with honey, enriched with milk, or flavored with herbs. In Iceland, settled by Norse migrants beginning in 874, written sagas describe thick porridges prepared from barley and oats, demonstrating continuity in dietary practices even in regions with limited arable land and harsher climates. Porridge provided a filling, easily digestible source of energy suitable for long days of work or extended travel. The production of grain-based foods was labor-intensive. Women commonly ground grain using rotary querns, heavy stone devices requiring repetitive motion. Querns have been found in farmsteads across Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, showing wear patterns consistent with long-term use. The coarse flour produced created dense breads, rich in fiber and nutrients, but tough to chew. These breads sustained farmers, traders, and warriors, supplying consistent energy for both physical labor and seafaring expeditions. Social distinctions were reflected in grain consumption. Wealthier Vikings could afford wheat, producing lighter bread considered prestigious. Wheat grains have been uncovered at high-status sites like Jarlshof in Shetland, active from the 9th century. Ordinary farmers and rank-and-file warriors relied on barley and rye, which were reliable but less refined. Bread served not only as sustenance, but also as a subtle indicator of social status, separating elites from commoners in everyday life. Military and logistical contexts also shaped grain use. In Danish ring fortresses such as Trelleborg and Firkat, built in the late 10th century under King Harald Bluetooth, archaeologists discovered clay-lined hearths and possible communal ovens, suggesting organized bread production to support station warriors. bread became part of the infrastructure of war, ensuring soldiers had dependable food to maintain stamina during campaigns and garrison duty. Written accounts from outside Scandinavia corroborate the importance of bread. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, the Arab envoy who encountered the Rus's Norse traders and warriors along the Volga River in 921, observed their reliance on bread alongside meat and alcohol, even far from their homelands. English chronicles mention Viking raiders destroying grain stores during attacks, reflecting the strategic value of cereals. To seize or destroy grain was to disrupt sustenance and weaken resistance. From Ribe and Birka to Hedeby and Iceland, grain-based foods were central to Viking life. The grinding of querns, baking of flatbreads, and cooking of porridge were daily routines that sustained ordinary households and enabled extraordinary feats, from trade voyages to military campaigns. Bread and porridge traveled well, stored efficiently, and provided the energy that allowed Viking warriors to endure the physical demands of life across northern Europe and beyond. Meat was essential to the Viking diet, particularly during campaigns and long voyages, providing protein and fat needed for strength and stamina. Archaeological evidence from the 9th to 11th century indicates that Norse communities in Scandinavia practiced extensive preservation methods to ensure meat remained edible over time. At sites such as Hedeby in present-day Germany, butchered animal bones, including cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, show cut marks consistent with systematic butchery. Evidence of hearths and smokehouses points to smoking and drying techniques, while salt, though less available in inland settlements, was used when obtainable from coastal trade. Curing meat through salting or smoking was common. In Ribe, Denmark, founded in the early 8th century, archaeologists uncovered salt storage vessels alongside charred animal bones, suggesting that salt curing was part of the provisioning process for both domestic and military purposes. Smoking, often over low fires in enclosed spaces, allowed meat to last for weeks or months, critical for raiding parties setting out on longships across the North Sea. Viking sagas from the 10th century mention salted and dried meat being packed for expeditions to England and Ireland, indicating the continuity of these practices over centuries. Dried and smoked meat provided a concentrated source of energy suitable for warriors. At Birka in Sweden, a significant trade hub from the mid-8th century to around 970, archaeologists found evidence of cured fish and game, alongside domesticated livestock remains. These provisions were portable and lightweight compared to fresh meat, making them ideal for transport on long marches or sea voyages. Dried venison, mutton, and pork could be stored in sacks or wooden containers, allowing crews to carry sufficient rations for weeks at a time without refrigeration. The types of meat consumed varied by season, location, and status. Coastal settlements relied heavily on salted and smoked fish, including cod and herring, while inland communities focused on domesticated animals. Archaeological digs in Norway and Sweden reveal a combination of beef, pork, and lamb, often butchered into strips for drying or packed in salt brines. Wealthier households might supplement these staples with venison or fowl, while poorer farmers relied on simpler cuts. The variation in meat types reflects both resource availability and social hierarchy, with higher status individuals accessing a greater diversity of preserved foods. Preservation techniques required skill and labor. Women typically oversaw the salting and smoking processes, monitoring temperatures and humidity levels to prevent spoilage. Smoking huts found in Viking settlements, such as those near Trelleborg in Denmark, were carefully constructed to maintain low, consistent heat, sometimes incorporating chimneys to channel smoke over hanging racks of meat. Drying often involved cutting meat into thin strips, which allowed air to circulate and moisture to evaporate, preventing bacterial growth. These practices were both practical and essential for survival, enabling extended campaigns and maritime expeditions without reliance on local food sources. Trade and raiding also influenced meat supplies. Salted and smoked meat was a common commodity in Viking markets across the North Sea, from Hedeby to York in England. Raiders often targeted livestock and stored provisions during raids, recognizing the value of preserved meat for sustaining both their own forces and controlling occupied territories. Contemporary chronicles, such as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describing the Viking attack on London in 994, mention the seizure of livestock and salted meat stores, demonstrating the strategic importance of these food resources. Beyond sustenance, preserved meat had practical advantages in military logistics. A longship crew traveling from Norway to the British Isles in the 9th or 10th century needed compact, calorie-dense food that would not spoil during the journey. Salted or smoked meat met this need, complementing grain-based provisions like flatbreads and porridge. Combined with fish and dairy when available, it formed a balanced supply of protein, fat, and energy to maintain the physical performance required for rowing, combat, and daily labor aboard ship. From domestic farms to fortified trading towns and raiding fleets, cured, smoked, and dried meat was indispensable to Viking life. It ensured that warriors could endure long marches, survive sea crossings, and remain combat-ready far from home. Meat preservation connected the agricultural sphere with military and maritime activity, providing continuity between household production and the demands of conquest and exploration that defined the Viking Age. Fish was a cornerstone of the Viking diet, offering a rich source of protein and essential fats, crucial for sustaining warriors during long campaigns and maritime voyages. Archaeological evidence from 9th to 11th century Scandinavia highlights extensive fishing and preservation practices. Coastal settlements in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, including sites like Kaupang in Norway, established around the early 9th century, yielded large quantities of fish bones, particularly from cod, herring, and salmon, confirming the importance of marine resources. These fish were consumed fresh when possible, but most were preserved through drying or salting, ensuring availability throughout the year and during expeditions far from home. Drying was the most common preservation method, especially in northern coastal regions. Fish, typically gutted and split, were strung on racks or hung from poles to air dry in wind and sun. In Iceland, settled by Norse migrants starting in 874, sagas describe fishermen preparing stockpiles of dried cod, known locally as stockfish, which could last for months and were easily transported. Salting, on the other hand, was more prevalent near trade hubs like Hedeby and Rebay, where salt from coastal sources or trade could be applied to fillets, allowing fish to remain edible even during long voyages to England, Ireland, or the Frankish territories. Herring, abundant in the North and Baltic seas, became a particularly important resource. Excavations in Birka, Sweden, active from the mid-8th century to about 970, reveal large concentrations of herring bones, suggesting both local consumption and possible trade. Herring's high-fat content provided concentrated calories, making it ideal for warriors and sailors who needed sustained energy for rowing and combat. Cod, leaner but high in protein, complemented herring in the diet. Preserved cod, either dried or salted, was lightweight, durable, and easily rehydrated in broths or porridge, making it practical for long campaigns. The process of preparing fish for storage required careful attention. Women in Viking households typically oversaw drying and salting, ensuring fish were properly cleaned, gutted, and either air-dried or layered with salt in barrels or wooden containers. Smokehouses have also been excavated at sites such as Hedeby, where smoke and low heat were used to both flavor and preserve fish. These methods ensured minimal spoilage and maximum shelf life, critical for sustaining crews on longships traveling from Norway to Ireland or France in the 9th and 10th centuries. Fish was not only vital for nutrition, but also for logistics. Longship crews traveling to the British Isles, the Frankish coasts, or the Irish Sea relied on compact, high-protein food that could be stored for weeks at sea. Combined with grain-based staples like flatbreads and porridge, dried and salted fish provided a balanced source of calories, protein, and fat, maintaining energy levels for rowing, combat, and other physically demanding tasks. Accounts from Arab travelers, including Ahmad ibn Fadlan in 921, note the reliance of Norse traders and warriors along the Volga River on preserved fish and bread during lengthy journeys, illustrating the consistent role of fish across different Viking communities. Evidence also points to the strategic use of fish in raids and trade. Viking fleets targeted regions with rich marine resources, understanding that acquiring salted and dried fish could sustain armies and crews, while also serving as a tradable commodity. In England, records of Viking incursions in the 9th and 10th centuries repeatedly note the capture of fish stores alongside livestock and grain, emphasizing the value of preserved seafood. Fish, therefore, played a dual role as both a dietary staple and a logistical asset, linking sustenance to military and economic power. The nutritional impact of fish extended beyond immediate energy needs. Omega-3 fatty acids and other essential nutrients help sustain cognitive function and physical endurance, particularly during winter campaigns when fresh meat and vegetables were scarce. Cod and herring, preserved for months, allowed Vikings to maintain strength across long-distance raids and seasonal voyages, including the raid on Paris in 845 and the expeditions to Ireland during the 10th century. Fish was a reliable, calorie-dense source that supported both domestic life and the demands of warfare. From coastal Norway to trading towns in Denmark and Sweden, and across the North Atlantic to Iceland, fish remained central to Viking endurance. Preservation methods ensured it could travel as far as their longships sailed, sustaining warriors, supporting raids, and reinforcing the connection between Scandinavian communities and the maritime environment that shaped their society and military campaigns. Dairy products were an essential component of the Viking diet, supplying protein, fat, and vital nutrients that complemented grains, meat, and fish. Archaeological and historical evidence from 9th to 11th century Scandinavia demonstrates that milk, cheese, and fermented products like skyr were staples in both domestic life and during campaigns. In rural settlements across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, evidence of cattle, goats, and sheep has been uncovered, showing that dairying was widespread. Bones found in Viking Age farmsteads, such as at Hofstadr in Iceland, settled around 870, indicate a focus on milk-producing animals. These animals not only provided milk, but also contributed to secondary products like cheese and butter, which were easier to preserve and transport. Milk was consumed fresh when available, typically from cows or goats, and was used for drinking, cooking, and as a base for other dairy products. Archaeological analysis of ceramic vessels from sites such as Hedeby in northern Germany, occupied from 800 until 1066, shows residue consistent with milk fats, confirming its regular consumption. Milk offered hydration and calories, and its protein and fat content helped sustain both adults and children in physically demanding environments. In Iceland, early settlers' sagas describe the daily use of milk, both raw and cooked, in porridges and stews, demonstrating its integration into staple meals. Cheese served as a more portable form of dairy, suitable for storage during raids or long voyages. Hard cheeses could be kept for weeks or months, making them practical for warriors and travelers. Excavations at Viking farmsteads in Denmark, such as Tisu, dating from the 9th to the 11th century, reveal evidence of small-scale cheese production, including stone tools for curd cutting and pressing. Cheese offered concentrated protein and fat, and its ability to endure without refrigeration made it indispensable during campaigns. Contemporary accounts, including the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, describing Viking activity in England in the 9th century, note that raiders carried preserved foods, likely including cheese, to sustain themselves far from home. Skyr, a fermented dairy product similar to modern yogurt, was also widely consumed. In Iceland, where settlement began in 874, skyr became a dietary mainstay. Sagas and farm records describe its production from strained milk, with whey removed and curds thickened through fermentation. Skyr was rich in protein, low in fat, and could be preserved longer than fresh milk, making it a versatile and nutritious addition to the diet. It could be eaten plain, mixed with grains, or combined with herbs or berries gathered from the surrounding environment, illustrating how Vikings adapted dairy products to local resources. Butter and other rendered fats also played a critical role. Butter was used in cooking and as a source of concentrated calories for both domestic use and travel. In archaeological layers at Hedeby and Birka, Remnants of churns and butter molds indicate systematic production. The energy-dense nature of butter provided Vikings with a lightweight and long-lasting source of fat, which was especially valuable during colder months or on long maritime expeditions. The preservation and transportation of dairy were key to sustaining campaigns. Hard cheeses, skyer in sealed containers, and clarified butter could survive weeks on longships crossing the North Sea. For raiding parties traveling to Ireland or the British Isles in the 9th and 10th centuries, these dairy provisions complemented dried fish, flatbreads, and cured meats, ensuring a balanced intake of protein, fat, and carbohydrates necessary for rowing, fighting, and enduring harsh climates. Dairy also influenced social and cultural practices. Wealthier households and chieftains often consumed richer dairy products or larger quantities, while ordinary farmers and warriors relied on simpler forms like skimmed milk, basic cheeses, and fermented skyer. Nonetheless, even the simplest dairy products were valuable for nutrition, morale, and sustenance. Archaeological evidence across Scandinavia and Iceland demonstrates the centrality of dairying, from domestic kitchens to communal kitchens in ring fortresses, linking everyday consumption to the logistical needs of larger military or trading ventures. From rural homesteads in Norway and Sweden to coastal trading centers and newly settled Icelandic farms, milk, cheese, and skyer provided reliable nutrition that could travel, last, and adapt to the demands of both domestic life and Viking expeditions. These dairy products were not just food. They were a practical, transportable, and high-calorie solution that supported survival and endurance on both land and sea, sustaining warriors as they traveled, raided, and traded across northern Europe and beyond. Alcoholic beverages were a notable part of the Viking diet, serving both as sources of calories and as social and ritual tools that shaped morale and cohesion. Beer and mead were the most common drinks, with archaeological and textual evidence confirming their widespread use from the 9th to the 11th century across Scandinavia. Residue analyses from ceramic vessels recovered at Viking settlements, such as Hedeby in northern Germany, occupied from around 800 until its destruction in 1066, revealed traces of barley and other grains, indicating beer production. Beer was made from malted barley or rye, boiled and fermented using natural yeasts. Its alcohol content was generally low, ranging from 2 to 4%, making it safe to drink in daily life, even for children, while still providing substantial calories and hydration. Mead, fermented from honey, was less common but highly valued. Honey, gathered from wild bees or maintained hives, was combined with water and sometimes flavored with herbs or spices. Archaeological finds from Viking Age sites in Denmark, such as the Ribe settlement active from the early 8th century, include large storage containers likely used for mead fermentation. Mead was richer in sugar and calories than beer, providing a concentrated source of energy that could sustain warriors during long voyages or campaigns. Its production required both time and resources, which often limited its consumption to special occasions, feasts, or ritual contexts. Beer and mead were not merely beverages. They played essential roles in Viking social life. Written sources, such as the accounts of Ahmad ibn Fadlan in 921 describing the Russes along the Volga River, note that Norse traders and warriors regularly consumed alcoholic drinks during communal gatherings and ceremonies. These drinks facilitated social bonding, reinforced hierarchies, and served as an integral part of ritualized events, including oath-swearing, feasts, and celebrations of victories or alliances. Chronicles from Anglo-Saxon England in the 9th and 10th centuries similarly describe Viking raiders enjoying beer and mead during winter quarters, emphasizing the beverage's importance beyond mere sustenance. The brewing and storage of beer required specific skills and infrastructure. Viking households and larger settlements maintained brewing vessels and clay pots for fermentation. At Hedeby and Birka, charred grains and residue analyses confirm that both small-scale household brewing and larger communal production existed. Beer could be consumed fresh or lightly fermented, and its portability made it practical for campaigns. Large barrels and sealed containers allowed supplies to travel aboard longships, providing a consistent caloric intake for warriors crossing the North Sea to raid in Ireland or England, as in the campaigns of 845-inch Paris and the 10th century Irish expeditions. Alcohol also contributed directly to physical energy. The low-alcohol beer of daily consumption contained carbohydrates and calories that supplemented grain-based foods, meat, and fish. While not a substitute for solid nutrition, beer provided hydration and additional energy for physically demanding tasks such as rowing longships, carrying equipment, or engaging in battle. Mead, with its higher sugar content, offered a denser energy source, useful for endurance during longer campaigns or ceremonial feasting events that sometimes lasted several days. Consumption practices were tied to hierarchy and occasion. Wealthier chieftains or longhouse leaders often enjoyed mead or higher quality beer, while ordinary warriors or farmers relied on basic beer. Seasonal brewing aligned with grain harvests, ensuring that large quantities of beer could be prepared for winter storage or military provisioning. The consistent production and storage of alcoholic beverages required knowledge of fermentation, sanitation, and vessel maintenance, underscoring that beer and mead were not accidental byproducts, but deliberate elements of the Viking diet. Beyond sustenance, beer and mead were tied to morale, ritual, and culture. Archaeological evidence of communal drinking vessels, such as the elaborately carved drinking horns from sites like Gokstad in Norway, dating to around 900, shows that alcohol facilitated social bonding and reinforced group identity. Warriors' gatherings, longship voyages, and feasting halls were united by the shared consumption of these beverages, providing both calories and cohesion. From everyday household brewing to ceremonial mead halls, Viking alcoholic beverages sustained energy, strengthened social ties, and reflected both practical and cultural priorities. Beer and mead were more than leisure drinks. They were essential to surviving and thriving in the physical, social, and ritual demands of Viking life, sustaining warriors and communities across Northern Europe and beyond. Vikings were not only warriors but also traders, explorers, and settlers, which required diets that could endure long journeys across land and sea. Travel foods needed to be portable, non-perishable, and nutritionally dense to support extended voyages on longships or expeditions into foreign territories. Archaeological evidence from settlements such as Hedeby in northern Germany, active from around 800 until its destruction in 1066, shows that dried grains, salted meat, and preserved fish were staples of Viking travel rations. These provisions were designed to last weeks or months without refrigeration, ensuring that warriors and crews maintained their strength during campaigns or trading missions. Bread and porridge were prepared in durable forms. Flatbreads made from barley or rye could be baked dense enough to survive weeks of storage. At Birka in Sweden, active from the mid-8th century to roughly 970, charred flatbread fragments found in storage pits suggest that households routinely prepared extra quantities specifically for voyages. Porridges, often dried or cooled into cakes, could be rehydrated with water or broth aboard ships. These preparations ensured that Vikings carried staple carbohydrates that were lightweight, concentrated, and easy to consume under challenging conditions. Preserved meats were equally important. Archaeological analyses of Viking-age sites such as Trelleborg and Fyrkat, the Danish ring fortresses built in the late 10th century under King Harald Bluetooth, reveal residues of smoked, cured, and dried meats. Beef, pork, and occasionally game such as deer or reindeer were treated with salt or smoked over wood fires to remove moisture, extend shelf life, and prevent spoilage. These processes created protein-rich foods that could survive weeks in barrels or sacks on longships, providing essential amino acids to maintain muscle function during rowing, portaging, and combat. Fish was another critical component. Cod and herring, caught along the North Sea and Baltic coasts, were split, salted, or air-dried. Excavations at Rebay and Hedeby reveal layers of fish bones and storage racks, indicating systematic preservation methods. Salted or dried fish supplied protein and essential fats, especially during voyages where fresh meat was unavailable. The ability to carry fish in bulk allowed crews to supplement meager rations of bread and porridge while maintaining stamina for long-distance travel or raiding campaigns. Dairy products were adapted for travel as well. Hard cheeses and skyr, a dense cultured dairy product, were stored in small containers and could survive for weeks without spoiling. Evidence from Iceland, settled by Norse migrants beginning in 874, describes the use of hard cheeses during sea voyages, confirming that dairy was a practical and calorically valuable part of long-distance provisioning. These foods provided both protein and fats necessary for endurance and recovery during laborious activities at sea or in foreign lands. Seasonal and local foraging complemented preserved provisions. Vikings often carried dried fruits, nuts, and berries to supplement rations during spring and summer expeditions. Archaeobotanical remains from sites in Denmark and Norway show charred and desiccated wild fruits, demonstrating that foraged foods were intentionally included in travel supplies. This combination of cultivated staples and foraged items created a flexible and balanced travel diet that could adapt to unpredictable conditions, from storms at sea to limited local resources. Logistics were crucial. Longship crews needed carefully measured portions stored in barrels, sacks, or wooden boxes to prevent spoilage and ensure equitable distribution. Written sources, such as accounts of the raid on Paris in 845, describe ships carrying food for weeks, emphasizing the necessity of portable and durable provisions for sustaining large crews. The Norse sagas also highlight strategic preparation of travel foods, including the storage of extra rations for winter journeys or prolonged campaigns in Ireland, England, or the Baltic regions. Portable foods were more than sustenance. They were tools of survival and strategy. The combination of dried grains, preserved meats, salted fish, hard cheeses, and foraged goods allowed Viking warriors and traders to endure harsh weather, long days of rowing, and extended battles. These provisions reflected ingenuity and foresight, ensuring that no matter how far from home, Vikings remained capable of maintaining energy, strength, and resilience. From longships crossing the North Sea to overland expeditions into Russia, Viking travel foods exemplified a balance of durability, nutrition, and practicality. Their careful preparation and storage reveal a society attuned to the demands of mobility, survival, and the physical requirements of conquest and exploration. Viking food culture was organized around two clearly defined purposes: survival and social display. On a daily basis and during military campaigns, diets emphasized practicality, caloric density, and portability, while feasts were designed to display abundance, status, and community cohesion. Archaeological and written sources demonstrate a consistent distinction between these two forms of consumption. The Great Hall at Borg in Lofoten, Norway, occupied from around 500 to 1,000, contains layers of cattle, pig, and sheep bones, charred grains, and other food remnants, reflecting large-scale feasting events attended by high-status individuals. By contrast, evidence from temporary encampments and ring fortresses, such as Trelleborg and Firkat, shows the use of compact, durable rations specifically chosen for their caloric content, longevity, and transportability. The clear contrast between these two dietary practices highlights how Vikings balanced daily survival and ceremonial consumption. Feasts were opportunities to assert wealth, reinforce social hierarchy, and strengthen communal bonds. In Hedeby, a settlement active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, archaeologists identified dense deposits of cattle, pig, and sheep bones concentrated in elite areas, indicating the preferential use of high-quality meats during ceremonial meals. Game animals, including deer, elk, and waterfowl such as geese and ducks, supplemented these events. Food preparation was complex, often involving roasting on spits over open fires, boiling in large cauldrons, and seasoning with herbs and preserved fruits. Bread, porridge, and dairy were served alongside the meats, but the focus was on variety, richness, and presentation rather than durability. Honey, nuts, and dried fruits enhanced flavors, and reinforced the symbolic and social importance of the meal. Multiple courses were customary, illustrating a level of culinary complexity absent from campaign rations, and highlighting the performative nature of these communal events. Alcohol also played a central role in Viking feasts. Ale brewed from barley or rye and mead fermented from honey were consumed liberally. Drinking vessels recovered from Birka, Sweden, dating from the mid-8th century to about 970, confirm that fermented beverages were integral to communal gatherings. These drinks provided calories, but also functioned as social instruments, facilitating toasts, rituals, and collective reinforcement of identity. Unlike campaign rations, where portions were carefully measured to conserve supplies, ale and mead were consumed freely, emphasizing fellowship, celebration, and morale. Written records from Icelandic settlements describe elaborate drinking ceremonies that were central to midwinter Yule festivals and other communal celebrations, underlining the role of alcohol in social cohesion. Campaign diets were minimal, energy-dense, and portable. Archaeological findings from Danish ring fortresses such as Trelleborg and Fyrkat, constructed in the late 10th century under King Harald Bluetooth, reveal reliance on preserved meats, salted or dried fish, hard cheeses, and dense barley breads. These foods were selected for their shelf life, caloric value, and ease of transport. Preparation was simple, often requiring only soaking or reheating, allowing warriors to eat quickly and conserve fuel. Rations were carefully calculated to sustain strength during extended sea voyages, overland marches, and raiding campaigns. When accessible, preserved fruits, nuts, and foraged greens supplemented these staples, but the primary focus remained on maximum energy in minimal volume. Written sources confirm these distinctions. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Viking raiders in Northumbria in 867 consumed bread and salted meat while on campaigns. In contrast, sagas like the Laxdala saga describe Icelandic halls filled with roasted meats, fresh dairy products, and imported delicacies during feasts. Seasonal timing further emphasized contrasts. Feasts coincided with harvest periods or midwinter Yule celebrations, when fresh and preserved foods were abundant, while campaigns were usually launched in spring and summer, taking advantage of favorable travel conditions and supplementing rations with local foraging or fishing. Although occasional overlap occurred, preserved foods from campaigns appeared in informal gatherings, and staple grains or dairy sometimes contributed to celebratory meals. The distinction remained clear. Feasts emphasized social status, ritual, and communal identity, while campaign diets focused on survival, efficiency, and mobility. The careful planning, preparation, and allocation of both feast and campaign foods reveal the adaptability, organization, and cultural priorities of Viking society, showing how diet functioned as both a means of sustenance and a medium of social expression. The dual approach to eating illustrates how Viking communities could sustain long campaigns while maintaining elaborate social traditions, balancing practical survival with ceremonial display, and adapting their food strategies to the demands of both conflict and celebration across a world defined by exploration, trade, and warfare. For Vikings, foraging supplemented cultivated crops and animal products, providing essential vitamins, minerals, and dietary variety. Archaeological and written evidence from Scandinavia and Viking settlements across the North Atlantic indicates that wild plant foods were a routine part of the diet, particularly during campaigns or in regions with limited arable land. Excavations at Hedeby, a major Viking settlement active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, revealed charred seeds, nutshells, and plant residues in refuse pits, suggesting that nuts, berries, and leafy greens were gathered locally and consumed year-round. Botanical studies confirm the presence of hazelnuts, bilberries, cranberries, wild apples, and other fruits, while greens such as nettles, sorrel, and wild cabbage supplemented household diets. These foods were valued not only for flavor, but for their nutritional contributions, helping maintain health during periods of high exertion or scarcity. Berries were particularly important for providing vitamin C and calories. In Norway, Iceland, and northern Sweden, bilberries and cranberries were abundant during the summer and autumn months, and sagas record their collection and storage for winter use. Archaeologists have found pits containing dried berries at Icelandic farmsteads, settled from 874 onward, indicating that Norse settlers adapted traditional Scandinavian practices to harsher northern environments. Bilberries and crowberries were dried in smokehouses or laid out on racks to preserve them for months, making them portable sources of nutrition for extended journeys or military campaigns. Berries could be eaten fresh, dried, or mixed with porridge and mead, illustrating their versatility in the Viking diet. Nuts, such as hazelnuts, were also gathered for both nutrition and storage. Hazelnuts were found at sites across Denmark, Norway, and the Orkney Islands, dating from the 9th to the 11th century. Their high fat and protein content made them especially valuable during long voyages or periods when preserved meats were scarce. Nuts were typically roasted or eaten raw, sometimes crushed and mixed with grains or berries to create a portable, energy-dense food suitable for warriors on the march. The labor of collecting and processing nuts was often communal, involving entire households or groups of workers during late summer and early autumn. Wild greens supplemented meals with vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Nettles, sorrel, dandelion leaves, and wild cabbage were harvested from meadows, riverbanks, and forest edges. In Icelandic sagas, such as the Landnámabók, settlers are described using foraged greens to supplement their diets when cultivated vegetables were scarce. Archaeological remains from Greenlandic Norse settlements, active from around 985 to the mid-15th century, reveal charred leaves and seeds in midden deposits, indicating that even in harsh environments, foraged greens were collected and consumed. Wild herbs also contributed flavor, while edible leaves provided essential nutrients absent from preserved or dried foods carried during voyages or campaigns. Foraging practices were seasonal and regionally adapted. In the summer and early autumn, communities gathered berries and nuts in bulk, sun-drying or smoking them to extend shelf life. Leafy greens were collected when young and tender, providing early-season nutrition before cultivated crops became available. Winter foraging relied on stored dried goods and hardy wild fruits, demonstrating careful planning and knowledge of local ecosystems. Travel accounts and sagas describe groups foraging along rivers, coasts, and forests during raids or migrations, showing that Norse populations depended on wild foods to complement rations and ensure survival. Evidence from both Scandinavia and Viking settlements abroad indicates that foraged foods were not marginal but integral to the diet. They filled nutritional gaps, added variety to otherwise repetitive meals, and offered portable, lightweight options suitable for long journeys. Archaeobotanical analysis from Hedeby, Ribe, and Icelandic farmsteads confirms the collection and storage of berries, nuts, and greens across diverse environments, highlighting the adaptability of Norse communities. The combination of cultivated crops, animal products, and foraged plants allowed Vikings to maintain health, endurance, and dietary balance during peacetime, exploration, and raiding. By integrating foraged berries, nuts, and wild greens into their food systems, Vikings achieved nutritional resilience across varied landscapes, supplementing their reliance on grains, meats, and dairy. These wild foods provided essential vitamins, calories, and dietary diversity while remaining lightweight, portable, and adaptable, demonstrating the sophisticated understanding Viking communities had of their natural environment and its seasonal resources. Vikings incorporated wild and cultivated herbs into their diets to enhance flavor, preserve food, and support health, especially during periods of sustained exertion such as farming, travel, and warfare. Archaeological evidence from sites across Scandinavia and Viking settlements in the North Atlantic indicates the deliberate collection, cultivation, and use of herbs from at least the 9th century to the 11th century. At Hedeby, active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, charred seeds and pollen from thyme, dill, parsley, and caraway were recovered from kitchen middens, suggesting these plants were used in everyday cooking as well as in medicinal preparations. In Iceland, settled beginning in 874, sagas and farmstead excavations reveal the use of local herbs such as angelica, sorrel, and chives, demonstrating adaptation to harsher climates where imported plants were scarce or unavailable. Archaeobotanical studies also show that Vikings in Greenland experimented with local flora, indicating an ongoing effort to identify herbs that could improve diet and maintain health in remote settlements. Herbs provided both flavor and nutritional benefits. Thyme and dill, found at Danish and Norwegian sites dating from the 9th century to the early 11th century, were used to season meats, fish, and porridge. Their aromatic qualities improved palatability in diets otherwise heavy in preserved or dried foods. Caraway seeds, recovered from Hedeby and Rybe, were commonly included in bread and porridge, offering vitamins and minerals, while also contributing digestive support. Sagas describe herbs such as angelica, juniper, and chamomile being used to make teas, decoctions, or infusions, indicating a practical knowledge of plants' health-supporting properties and their role in sustaining stamina during physically demanding labor, extended sea voyages, and military campaigns. These uses were integrated into daily life, not reserved solely for high-status households, reflecting a widespread appreciation for the functional qualities of herbs. Certain herbs were also valued for their preservative and antibacterial properties. Juniper berries, widely found across Viking Age Scandinavia, were used to flavor meat and fish while simultaneously inhibiting spoilage. Experimental reconstructions of Viking cooking suggest that incorporating herbs into salted or smoked provisions improved durability during long journeys. Rosemary, though less common in northern sites, appears in some trading records from the early 10th century, indicating that Norse merchants and raiders imported Mediterranean herbs for both culinary and practical purposes. This combination of local foraging and selective importation reflects an understanding of how herbs could extend the shelf life of food while also enhancing its nutritional value. Herbs were closely linked to health and endurance. Angelica, chamomile, and sorrel, documented in Icelandic and Greenlandic farmsteads from the 10th century onward, were likely used to treat minor ailments, aid digestion, and provide essential nutrients, complementing the staples of grain, meat, and dairy. Modern analysis of Viking settlements confirms the widespread presence of these species in domestic contexts, supporting the view that they were regularly consumed rather than being rare or ceremonial additions. Pollen studies and charred remains demonstrate that herb use was consistent across geographic and social contexts. Collecting herbs required knowledge of local ecology, seasonal cycles, and plant properties. Communities harvested thyme, dill, and caraway during summer and early autumn, when the plants were at peak flavor and potency. Fresh herbs were incorporated immediately into meals, while others were dried for storage over winter or for use on extended trading journeys and raiding expeditions. Written accounts from the 9th and 10th centuries, including sagas and chronicles, describe travelers and warriors carrying small bundles of dried herbs to season meals during voyages, illustrating that herbs were an essential component of logistical planning for sustenance and morale. Herbal use extended to communal meals, campaigns, and health practices. In Hedeby, evidence from both elite and common households indicates that herb incorporation was not limited to high-status sites. Pollen analysis shows that herbs were widely distributed, not solely imported or exotic. In Icelandic settlements, angelica, sorrel, and chives supplemented preserved foods, providing vitamins and minerals lacking in stored grains or salted meats. Such plants enhanced taste, supported nutrition, and contributed to stamina during travel, agricultural labor, and raiding expeditions. Overall, Viking knowledge of herbs demonstrates practical adaptation, experimentation, and ecological understanding. Through foraging, cultivation, and selective importation, Norse communities enhanced both flavor and nutrition in their diets. Herbs strengthened everyday sustenance, supported long-term health, and complemented energy-dense staples, illustrating a sophisticated awareness of the natural environment and its role in maintaining strength and stamina across diverse Scandinavian and North Atlantic landscapes. Viking meals were not only practical, but also ritualized, with certain foods taking on sacred significance and influencing morale during campaigns. Archaeological and written sources indicate that the preparation, consumption, and presentation of these foods were deeply intertwined with spiritual practice, social cohesion, and psychological readiness for battle. In central Norway, at sites such as Borg in Lofoten, dating from around 500 to 1000, excavations revealed deposits of animal bones placed in distinct patterns and near hearths, suggesting ritual slaughter or offerings tied to communal feasts. These practices were mirrored in settlements across Denmark and Sweden, where charred remains and ceremonial vessels indicate that food often had symbolic as well as nutritional importance. Ritual meals reinforce the connection between the warriors, their leaders, and the gods. Written sagas, including the Hervarar saga, describe feasts held before expeditions, where meat, bread, and ale were consecrated in honor of deities like Odin and Thor. These meals were timed to coincide with seasonal festivals or prior to major military actions, serving both spiritual and practical functions. Warriors consuming these foods believed they were endowed with strength, protection, and courage. Archaeological evidence from Hedeby, active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, shows animal bones placed in unusual contexts, sometimes alongside drinking vessels, supporting the notion that pre-battle meals were structured as sacred offerings to ensure divine favor. Certain foods carried specific ritual significance. Pigs and cattle were commonly used for sacrificial meals, their meat prepared in large cauldrons or roasted over open fires. In Iceland, sagas record the ceremonial slaughter of oxen during Yule feasts, where the meat was distributed among community members and warriors, reinforcing social bonds while serving as a morale booster. Ale and mead, fermented from barley, rye, or honey, were central to these rituals, used in libations and toasts to deities, fallen warriors, or community leaders. Drinking vessels from Birka, Sweden, dating from the mid-8th century to about 970, reveal patterns of communal consumption that indicate both celebratory and sacred functions. The preparation of ritual meals often required specialized knowledge. Certain herbs, grains, and dairy products were selected for symbolic or energetic qualities, while specific cuts of meat were preferred for offerings. In some settlements, designated individuals oversaw cooking for sacred purposes, ensuring that the food met spiritual as well as practical requirements. Written accounts from Icelandic and Norse chronicles describe priests or chieftains blessing the meal, demonstrating that ritualized eating was a structured and deliberate practice rather than informal. Sacred food also played a key role in maintaining morale during campaigns. Provisions carried on long voyages or military expeditions often included preserved meats, salted fish, or dense breads, which could be incorporated into small, ritualized meals before battle. These acts helped to create a sense of continuity with homeland traditions, reinforcing social hierarchy and community identity. The act of eating together, sharing food, and invoking divine favor strengthened bonds among warriors and provided psychological preparation for combat. Even in harsh conditions, maintaining these ritual elements was considered essential to sustaining group cohesion and personal courage. Overlap between sacred and practical foods was common. Everyday staples such as grains, dairy, or fish could be elevated through ritual practice, particularly when consumed in a structured pre-battle context. Offerings, sacrifices, and ceremonial drinking intertwined with mundane consumption, blurring the line between nourishment and spiritual preparation. Written accounts from the 9th and 10th centuries, including the Laxdæla saga, describe how warriors and households combined daily sustenance with symbolic acts, reflecting the integrated role of food in both physical and psychological readiness. The use of sacred food underscores the multifaceted nature of Viking diet and culture. Beyond meeting nutritional needs, meals provided a medium for expressing religious devotion, reinforcing social hierarchies, and preparing individuals mentally for the challenges of warfare. The careful selection, preparation, and communal consumption of these foods highlight how Vikings recognized the interplay between sustenance, spirituality, and morale. Sacred meals were thus as much about ensuring cohesion, courage, and divine favor as they were about providing energy for travel and combat, revealing the complex role of food in sustaining both body and mind across Scandinavian and North Atlantic landscapes. Viking expeditions, trading voyages, and military campaigns frequently faced critical shortages of food, forcing warriors, sailors, and support personnel to improvise in order to maintain strength and survive extended operations. Archaeological evidence from temporary encampments, ring fortresses, coastal outposts, and longships across Scandinavia, the North Atlantic, the British Isles, and the Baltic demonstrates that even meticulously planned campaigns could encounter severe scarcity. At Trelleborg in Denmark, constructed in the late 10th century under King Harald Bluetooth, storage pits contained grains, salted meats, dried fish, and hard cheeses organized in separate compartments. Analysis of these remains indicates deliberate portioning, suggesting that commanders implemented strict rationing systems to extend supplies over weeks or months of continuous travel. Despite these precautions, archaeological and written records indicate that provisions often ran low, and Vikings had to rely on foraging, hunting, fishing, and acquisition of local resources to sustain themselves during long campaigns. Contemporary chronicles from England, Ireland, and the North Atlantic provide corroborating evidence. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Viking raiders in Northumbria in 867 survived on bread and salted meat, supplemented by foraged foods, when their own stores were insufficient. Irish annals note that during winter raids on Dublin in the late 9th century, Vikings seized livestock, grain, and fish from local communities to compensate for depleted rations. Icelandic sagas describing settlement beginning in 874 depict settlers enduring harsh winters when stored grains, meats, and dairy supplies ran out, forcing communities to rely on preserved roots, wild greens, herbs, and hunted game. Saga accounts also describe the use of fish traps and winter hunting of seals and birds to maintain food availability. These narratives illustrate that scarcity was a persistent challenge, influencing both campaign planning and daily survival strategies. When standard rations were exhausted, Vikings turned to foraging and opportunistic local resources. Coastal expeditions focused on fishing, collecting shellfish, and gathering edible seaweeds. Archaeological layers in northern Scotland, Orkney, and Western Ireland contain abundant remains of mussels, crabs, small fish, and bird eggs, demonstrating supplemental consumption during periods of scarcity. Inland campaigns and overland marches required gathering wild roots, herbs, berries, nuts, and edible greens. Botanical analyses from Hedeby, a settlement active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, reveal hazelnuts, elderberries, sorrel, and a variety of herbs in domestic middens. These resources provided essential vitamins, calories, and flavor, allowing warriors to extend limited rations while maintaining energy for travel, labor, and combat operations. Preserved foods such as salted and smoked meats, dried fish, and hard cheeses were critical but could degrade over time, especially during extended campaigns or maritime voyages. Studies from Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish Viking Age sites indicate that even carefully prepared provisions could spoil or lose nutritional value. To compensate, preserved foods were combined with locally obtained resources, including small game, foraged plants, and occasionally crops or livestock seized from villages along the route. This adaptive strategy required extensive knowledge of local ecology, seasonal availability, and practical preservation techniques. Rationing practices were systematic and hierarchical. Large settlements and fortresses, including Fyrkat and Agersborg in Jutland, demonstrate controlled food distribution with communal storage and allocated portions for warriors. Archaeological evidence shows that porridge, bread, cheese, and dried meat were carefully measured, sometimes supplemented with small quantities of foraged or hunted foods. In times of severe shortage, warriors had to consume less palatable or partially spoiled items, a reality reflected in saga narratives, ship burials, and midden analysis. Such rationing also influenced morale and combat readiness, demonstrating the critical relationship between food availability and operational capability. Seasonal planning was essential to mitigate hunger, campaigns were typically launched in spring or summer, when travel was possible and preserved provisions could be supplemented by foraging, fishing, or local acquisition. Harvest time and midwinter Yule celebrations provided opportunities for resupply and stockpiling, with surplus grains, preserved meats, and dairy stored to sustain both communities and raiding parties. Leaders incorporated detailed knowledge of seasonal cycles, local food sources, and preservation techniques to maintain operational capability despite fluctuating supplies. Extreme scarcity necessitated combining multiple strategies: rationed preserved foods, foraged berries and nuts, hunted game, edible roots, and occasionally emergency livestock. Archaeological evidence from coastal and inland sites across Norway, Denmark, and the British Isles confirms that this multifaceted approach was widespread and essential to survival. This strategy demonstrates the Vikings' adaptability, logistical planning, and practical understanding of nutrition under physically demanding conditions. Hunger and scarcity shaped decision-making, mobility, and survival, highlighting the central role of food management in both military campaigns and everyday life. Berserkers were elite Viking warriors, described in contemporary sources, including skaldic poetry and sagas from the 9th to the 11th centuries, as entering trance-like states that made them impervious to pain and capable of extraordinary strength. Their physical performance required a highly structured diet emphasizing caloric density, protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Archaeological evidence from key Viking settlements, such as Hedeby in northern Germany, Borg in Lofoten, Norway, and Trelleborg in Denmark, occupied from the 8th to the 11th centuries, indicates that communities maintained access to abundant and diverse food supplies. These provisions sustained warriors on raiding expeditions, longships, and military campaigns across Scandinavia, the North Atlantic, the British Isles, and the Baltic Sea. Protein was central to maintaining muscle strength and stamina. Excavations at Hedeby, active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, revealed remains of cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, as well as wild game such as deer, elk, and boar. Hunting and animal husbandry ensured that warriors, especially berserkers, had access to prime cuts of meat. Fish, particularly herring, cod, and flatfish, was salted or dried to provide a reliable source of protein and essential fatty acids during maritime expeditions. Saga narratives, including the Laxdæla saga from Iceland, post 874, occasionally note the ceremonial or ritual consumption of horse meat, though this was rare and mostly symbolic. The variety and quality of protein sources allowed berserkers to recover quickly from exertion and maintain high levels of physical readiness. Dairy products were another critical component. Skyr, a thick, high-protein fermented milk, was consumed alongside hard cheeses, butter, and buttermilk. Excavations in Norwegian and Icelandic farmsteads show that these products were stored in containers suitable for both domestic use and long voyages. Skyr, in particular, was rich in protein and fat, making it an ideal energy source for berserkers engaged in prolonged activity. Archaeological finds in Iceland, from settlements established after 874, indicate that dairy was a central part of both daily sustenance and travel rations, supporting endurance in both harsh winters and extended campaigns. Grain supplied essential carbohydrates to sustain prolonged physical exertion. Barley, rye, and oats were ground into flour for breads, flatbreads, and porridge, releasing energy slowly to support endurance. Storage pits at Trelleborg, constructed in the late 10th century under King Harald Bluetooth, demonstrate careful rationing of grains to ensure warriors could sustain themselves over long periods of campaigning. Flatbreads were compact and portable, while porridge provided a warm, nutrient-dense meal that could be quickly prepared. Preserved and supplemented foods allowed berserkers to maintain high energy even during scarcity. Salted and smoked meats, dried fish, and hard cheeses were combined with foraged berries, nuts, edible roots, and occasionally captured livestock, providing essential vitamins and minerals. Archaeological layers from coastal Scotland, Orkney, Western Ireland, and Norwegian sites show remains of mussels, crabs, and bird eggs, confirming that Vikings supplemented rations with opportunistic local resources when provisions ran low. These practices required detailed knowledge of seasonal cycles, preservation techniques, and local ecology. Ritual and seasonal dietary practices played a complementary role. Sagas and skaldic poems describe warriors consuming specific foods or observing preparation methods thought to enhance combat performance. Spring and summer campaigns allowed for fresh meat, fish, and plants, while winter diets relied heavily on stored grains, preserved meat, and dairy. Evidence from Greenlandic settlements after 982 indicates that Arctic conditions required careful planning, combining stored provisions with hunting seals, birds, and caribou to maintain caloric intake. These seasonal adaptations helped berserkers maintain stamina year-round. Alcohol, particularly mead and ale, was sometimes incorporated for its caloric content and perceived psychological effects. Vessel finds from Birka, Sweden, mid-8th century to about 970, confirm that fermented beverages were used ceremonially and socially, but limited consumption may also have supplemented energy during campaigns. This suggests that diet and morale were intertwined, and that even elite warriors like berserkers relied on both food and drink to sustain performance. The combination of high-quality proteins, energy-dense dairy, slow-release carbohydrates, supplemental foraged foods, and limited fermented beverages reflects careful planning, resource management, and understanding of nutrition. This diet allowed berserkers to sustain extreme physical exertion during raiding, naval expeditions, and land campaigns, ensuring they could perform at peak capacity under the demanding conditions of Viking military and maritime operations across Scandinavia, the North Atlantic, and the British Isles. Viking armies and raiding parties relied heavily on communal cooking practices to sustain warriors during campaigns and long voyages. Archaeological excavations at Trelleborg and Fyrkat in Denmark, constructed in the late 10th century under King Harald Bluetooth, reveal centralized hearths and cooking pits within fortresses, indicating organized preparation of meals for groups of soldiers. These hearths were often circular stone or earth structures, sometimes measuring up to 3 meters across, capable of accommodating large cauldrons or spits for roasting animals. Written accounts from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describe Viking raiders in Northumbria in 867, stopping in encampments to boil meat and grains over fires, illustrating the practical and social importance of shared food preparation during military operations. Cooking practices were adapted to both fixed and mobile situations. In coastal raids or riverine expeditions, temporary fires were constructed using driftwood, peat, or collected timber. Excavations of Viking longships from Norway, such as the Gokstad burial ship dating to around 890, contain iron cauldron fragments and evidence of portable cooking implements, showing that even seafaring warriors maintained the ability to prepare warm meals during extended voyages. Portable cooking also included tripods and iron hooks for suspending pots over flames, and wooden stakes for roasting meat, often supplemented with large knives and cleavers for butchering game or livestock on site. The communal aspect of cooking extended beyond practicality. Meals were a central feature of social cohesion, with warriors participating in preparation and serving. In Hedeby, a settlement active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, analysis of kitchen middens reveals charred grains, bones, and hearth residues indicating simultaneous preparation of porridge, soups, and roasted meats for dozens of individuals. This practice reinforced hierarchy, as senior warriors or commanders typically oversaw the allocation of rations, while younger fighters assisted with fire management, chopping wood, and maintaining cooking vessels. Written sagas, including the Laxdala saga and Erbygja saga, describe warriors gathering around fires to share stews and bread during campaigns, highlighting the combination of sustenance and ritualized social interaction. Different cooking methods were employed depending on available resources. Boiling in cauldrons allowed for preparation of porridges, soups, and stews that combined grains, vegetables, and preserved meats, maximizing caloric intake and nutrient density. Roasting on spits, often over open flames, was common for larger cuts of meat, particularly livestock captured during raids or transported from home settlements. Smoking and slow cooking were occasionally applied to extend shelf life during campaigns, a method documented in archaeological smokehouses at Hedeby and Ribe in Denmark from the 9th and 10th centuries. Boiling water for soups and gruel also had the additional benefit of sterilizing water in environments where fresh sources were limited. Communal eating played a key role in maintaining morale. Sharing hot meals created a sense of collective identity among warriors, providing psychological comfort during periods of physical strain or uncertainty. Sagas recount that during winter expeditions in the North Atlantic, settlers and raiders alike relied on hearth-cooked meals to sustain energy and maintain social bonds, with porridge often served alongside dried fish, cheese, and foraged greens. Ale and mead, consumed in moderation, accompanied these meals, reinforcing communal cohesion while supplying additional calories. Contemporary records indicate that Vikings in Dublin in 902 prepared large stews and barley-based meals for raiding parties, demonstrating consistency in cooking practices across geographic regions. Hearths and fires were carefully managed for efficiency and safety. Archaeological evidence from Fyrkat and Agersborg fortresses shows systematic layouts with designated areas for cooking, wood storage, and smoke ventilation. Smoke from fires was controlled to avoid revealing the location of camps to enemies, while still providing adequate heat for meal preparation. In mobile encampments, fire pits were often dug into sand or gravel to reduce the risk of uncontrolled spread and to retain heat for extended cooking periods. The integration of structured hearths, portable cooking implements, and communal participation illustrates how Vikings combined food preparation with logistical planning and social organization. Evidence from Danish, Norwegian, and Icelandic sites from the 9th to 11th centuries demonstrates that cooking was both a functional necessity and a central component of campaign organization, morale maintenance, and community identity. Shared meals ensured warriors remained nourished and cohesive, while highlighting the adaptability, resourcefulness, and cultural priorities of Viking societies in both settled and mobile contexts. Viking access to exotic foods came through a combination of long-distance trade networks and raiding expeditions that extended from Scandinavia to the British Isles, the Baltic, and even the Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence shows that Viking merchants and raiders actively sought rare and foreign goods to supplement their diets and display wealth. In Hedeby, a prominent trading settlement active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, excavations uncovered ceramic fragments, glass beads, and copper coins from the Rhineland and Islamic regions, indicating well-established trade links. Botanical remains, including saffron traces in food preparation areas dated to the late 10th century, suggest that Vikings valued and sometimes incorporated imported spices into their meals. Similarly, at Ribe, Denmark, excavations between 2010 and 2015 revealed Mediterranean amphora fragments, likely carrying olive oil or wine, which would have been rare commodities for Norse consumers. The presence of imported wine residues in Hedeby's merchant houses, dated 950 to 1000, confirms that these items were actively consumed rather than stored solely for trade. Raiding activity also played a crucial role in acquiring exotic foods. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records Viking raids on England from 865 to 878, in which raiders seized livestock, preserved grains, and sometimes wine or salted fish from monasteries and wealthy estates. Irish annals document the 841 raid on Dublin, where Viking forces captured cattle, butter, and salted fish supplies to sustain their fleets. Even smaller raids, such as those in the Orkney Islands around 875, reportedly resulted in the seizure of cheese and dried meat to supplement long-term provisions. These campaigns allowed Vikings to obtain not only sustenance, but also commodities that could be traded further, creating a cycle of food acquisition and redistribution that supplemented local resources. Trade networks extended into the Baltic and North Atlantic, connecting Viking communities with distant regions. In Birka, Sweden, a settlement active from the mid-8th century to about 970, Archaeologists found imported black pepper residues in household contexts, suggesting the use of exotic seasonings in elite kitchens. Additionally, preserved fragments of figs, grapes, and nuts indicate that Mediterranean imports occasionally reached Scandinavia. Icelandic sagas, such as the Laxdæla saga and the saga of the Greenlanders, describe the arrival of goods from Norway, including dried fruits, imported wine, and preserved spices, illustrating that even early settlers valued rare items for consumption and status display. Excavations at Greenlandic sites from 985 to 1000, particularly at Brattahlid, have recovered shells and bones from imported marine species, showing that maritime trade introduced not only spices, but also seafood beyond local availability. Food obtained from raiding and trading also supported the logistical demands of long voyages. Viking ships, such as the Gokstad vessel constructed around 890, carried limited supplies of preserved meat, salted fish, and barley, but when visiting foreign ports, crews acquired fresh or exotic provisions to supplement their rations. Archaeological layers at York, England, dated 866 to 876, reveal a combination of local and imported food remains, including spices, preserved fish, and citrus seeds, suggesting that raiders and traders integrated foreign foods into daily consumption while maintaining traditional staples. Records from Rebay in the early 10th century indicate merchants traded imported wine for salted fish, demonstrating the strategic interchange of food items. The use of exotic foods served both practical and social purposes. Imported items like spices, dried fruits, and wine were consumed during feasts, marking wealth and prestige, but they also contributed variety and nutrients to otherwise repetitive diets. Excavations at the Viking settlement of Kaupang in Norway, active from 800 to 900, recovered residues of imported oils, spices, and preserved fruits in domestic cooking areas, showing that elite households experimented with taste and nutrition. Written accounts from Icelandic sagas confirm that such foods were highly valued and sometimes distributed during important ceremonies or seasonal celebrations, reinforcing social hierarchy and signaling success in trade or raiding ventures. Viking engagement with foreign foods highlights a sophisticated understanding of resource acquisition, trade, and raiding. They maintained networks that spanned northern Europe, the Mediterranean, and the North Atlantic, adapting local diets to incorporate rare ingredients whenever possible. While not universally accessible, these exotic items enhanced nutrition, provided flavor variety, and reflected social status. Archaeological evidence across Hedeby, Rebay, Birka, York, Kaupang, and Greenland underscores the importance of imported foods in Viking communities, demonstrating that diet, trade, and raiding were intertwined in sustaining both daily life and long-distance expeditions. Viking military and trading campaigns required extensive planning and management of food supplies, which was crucial to sustaining both the crew of ships and overland forces during long expeditions. Archaeological evidence and contemporary sources indicate that Norse commanders implemented careful provisioning systems to prevent shortages while maintaining mobility and combat readiness. At Trelleborg in Denmark, a ring fortress constructed under King Harald Bluetooth in the late 10th century, storage pits revealed carefully organized grains, dried fish, salted meats, and hard cheeses, demonstrating that leaders maintained structured rations for warriors. Written accounts from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle record that raiding parties traveling from Denmark to Northumbria in 867 carried sufficient food for weeks, but still relied on local foraging and acquisition of livestock during extended operations. This combination of preparation and opportunistic resupply reflects a strategic approach to campaign logistics. Ship-based campaigns required special attention to perishable provisions. Longships such as the Gokstad vessel constructed around 890 carried limited quantities of salted meat, dried fish, and barley in barrels and sacks designed for compact storage. Archaeological finds from Birka, Sweden, suggest that crews supplemented these rations with foraged foods at stopovers along the Baltic coast. Sagas and chronicles describe the importance of portable, high-calorie foods, including hard cheese and dried meats, for maintaining energy on extended voyages. For instance, the 865 raid on East Anglia records that Viking forces survived by rationing preserved foods and supplementing with local livestock and grain seized from estates. These practices highlight the importance of balancing storage capacity, weight distribution, and nutritional value during maritime campaigns. Overland campaigns also required careful food management, as armies needed to maintain mobility across varied terrain while ensuring adequate nutrition. The Irish annals note that during the winter raids on Dublin in the late 9th century, Viking forces supplemented their provisions with local fish, game, and dairy products. Botanical analyses from Hedeby, active from 800 until its destruction in 1066, reveal the collection of hazelnuts, berries, and edible greens, which were likely used to extend rations during prolonged overland movements. Archaeological layers at Aggersborg and Fyrkat in Jutland indicate that communal storage systems allocated grains and dried meats in measured portions, reflecting an organized hierarchy of food distribution to maintain morale and combat readiness. Trade networks further supported campaign logistics by providing access to imported or exotic provisions. Viking merchants and raiders could obtain items such as olive oil, dried fruits, wine, and spices from settlements in the Rhineland, the British Isles, or the Mediterranean. Excavations in Hedeby and Rebay reveal amphora fragments, imported spices, and residues of wine, indicating that commanders integrated these goods into both daily consumption and celebratory feasts. Icelandic sagas, including the Laxdæla saga and Saga of the Greenlanders, describe long-distance expeditions where crews carried supplies from Norway and supplemented them with local acquisitions at stopover points. These practices ensured sustained energy, improved flavor in otherwise monotonous diets, and reinforced social hierarchies through selective distribution of exotic items. Rationing was critical to prevent depletion of supplies, particularly during winter campaigns or extended maritime voyages. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that Vikings used hierarchical allocation, ensuring warriors received staples such as porridge, bread, cheese, and salted meats, while more vulnerable or lower status personnel consumed reduced portions. Shipboard organization often mirrored these practices, with communal cooking areas and shared provisions carefully measured. Saga narratives note instances of severe shortage, where crews relied on foraged foods, small game, and occasionally emergency livestock to sustain themselves, illustrating the necessity of flexible logistical planning. Seasonal cycles dictated campaign timing, provisioning, and resupply opportunities. Spring and summer campaigns benefited from abundant local resources, while winter campaigns demanded reliance on stored or preserved foods. Harvest periods allowed settlements to stockpile grains, dried fish, and preserved dairy, creating reserves that supported both domestic populations and raiding parties. Commanders accounted for regional availability of resources, distances traveled, and the expected duration of campaigns, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of food as a strategic tool. The combination of pre-planned rations, opportunistic acquisition, and trade integration highlights the Vikings' practical approach to sustenance in military operations. Archaeological and textual evidence from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, the British Isles, and the North Atlantic underscores that campaign logistics were not ad hoc, but carefully calculated to maintain operational capacity, energy, and morale across diverse environments. Proper food management was integral to Viking strategy, enabling raiders and traders alike to sustain themselves during challenging expeditions, reinforce social hierarchies, and maintain combat effectiveness over extended periods. Modern research into Viking diets combines archaeological, biochemical, and historical evidence to reconstruct the nutritional profile of warriors and settlers during the 9th to 11th centuries. Stable isotope analysis of human skeletal remains from sites such as Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, and York in England reveals a diet rich in animal protein, including both terrestrial and marine sources. Bones from Birka, dating from 800 to 950, indicate that adult males consumed approximately 60% of their protein from meat and fish, with the remainder from cereals and legumes. Isotopic signatures from coastal settlements in Norway and Iceland, dating from 870 to 1020, show higher levels of marine protein, suggesting that communities adapted their diet to available resources while maintaining caloric sufficiency during periods of migration or long voyages. Archaeobotanical evidence complements skeletal analysis. Excavations at Hedeby and Rebay reveal charred barley, oats, rye, and wheat grains, while pollen and seed analysis indicates the presence of cultivated herbs such as dill, thyme, and caraway. These findings suggest that Vikings relied on a combination of locally grown grains and imported spices to enhance both nutrition and flavor. Grain consumption, often in the form of porridge or flatbreads, provided essential carbohydrates necessary to sustain high levels of physical activity, while herbs contributed micronutrients and digestive support. Similarly, residue analysis in ceramic vessels from sites like Dublin, dating from 850 to 950, demonstrates the use of dairy products, including milk, whey, and skyr, as important sources of protein and calcium. Lipid and protein residue analysis from Viking cooking implements and storage containers confirms widespread use of preserved meats, smoked fish, and hard cheeses. Archaeologists studying longships, such as the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, indicate that Viking crews carried compact, high-calorie provisions during extended raids or trade voyages. Dried fish and salted meats, often combined with grains or foraged items, supplied sufficient calories to sustain energy-intensive activities like rowing, hauling, and combat. Modern nutritional calculations suggest that a typical male warrior required between 3,500 to 4,500 calories per day, depending on campaign intensity and season, and that the combination of meat, fish, grains, and dairy adequately met these demands. Experimental archaeology has provided further insight into food preparation and nutrient retention. Reconstructed Viking hearths and cooking implements, tested in controlled settings, show that boiling grains with meat or fish retain the majority of protein and essential vitamins, while smoking and drying methods effectively preserved calories without significant loss. Researchers at the University of Oslo and the University of Copenhagen have conducted these experiments, confirming that Viking preservation techniques, including salting, smoking, and fermenting, maintain both flavor and nutritional value over long periods. This practical knowledge was crucial for sustaining warriors on long campaigns or during harsh winters when fresh food was limited. Skeletal analyses also highlight dietary adaptations to stress and physical exertion. Evidence of dental wear and enamel hypoplasia suggests periods of food scarcity or reliance on coarse grains, while isotopic signatures reveal that high-status individuals consumed greater quantities of marine protein and imported foods, such as wine or preserved fruits, enhancing both energy intake and social prestige. Comparisons between graves from elite and common households at Hedeby, dating from 900 to 1050, demonstrate nutritional stratification, indicating that commanders and higher-ranking warriors had access to more diverse and calorically dense provisions. Analysis of micronutrients and fatty acids indicates that inclusion of fish, dairy, and foraged plant materials mitigated deficiencies common in cereal-heavy diets. Modern dietary reconstructions suggest that a combination of cod, herring, milk, skyr, nuts, berries, and herbs provided sufficient protein, calcium, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamins to support rigorous daily activity. Additionally, archaeological evidence of communal consumption of mead and beer points to the role of alcohol in maintaining hydration and morale, although modern calculations emphasize its limited nutritional contribution. In summary, combining skeletal, archaeobotanical, residue, and experimental data provides a detailed picture of Viking nutrition. From coastal settlements in Norway and Denmark to inland ring fortresses and raiding encampments in the British Isles, Vikings consumed a balanced diet designed to sustain energy, strength, and health across seasons and terrains. Modern analysis confirms that these strategies, refined over centuries, allowed warriors and settlers to endure long voyages, demanding labor, and extended military campaigns while maintaining physical resilience and community cohesion. The diet of Viking warriors left an enduring imprint not only on the societies they influenced, but also on the broader historical perception of their culture. From the late 8th century to the early 11th century, the food consumed by Vikings was tightly linked to their physical capabilities, social structure, and martial identity, creating a legacy that continues to inform modern understanding of Norse society. Archaeological sites across Scandinavia, including Hedeby in Schleswig-Holstein, Denmark, active from 800 until 1066, and Borg in Lofoten, Norway, occupied from around 500 to 1000, illustrate a diet carefully balanced between sustaining physical labor and signaling social status. Excavated animal bones, charred grains, and remnants of preserved fish indicate that meat, fish, dairy, grains, and seasonal forage plants were central components of both daily sustenance and ceremonial feasts, reinforcing a connection between nutrition and societal hierarchy. Viking warriors required high-calorie diets to support intense activity during rowing, overland marches, and combat, with estimated daily needs of 4,000 to 5,000 calories. Preserved provisions, including salted meats, smoked fish, hard cheeses, and dense barley breads, provided sustained energy during extended campaigns and sea voyages. These foods were often supplemented by foraged berries, nuts, and wild greens, demonstrating adaptability to local resources and seasonal fluctuations. Archaeobotanical studies from Hedeby and Rebay, dating from the 9th century to 1066, reveal that a variety of grains, legumes, and preserved vegetables were included in the diet, supporting both caloric intake and micronutrient needs. Experimental archaeology, replicating longship voyages in campaign conditions, confirms that such dietary strategies could maintain strength and stamina over prolonged periods, illustrating practical knowledge of nutrition that complemented tactical and logistical planning. The reliance on preserved and portable foods also highlights the integration of sustenance and strategy, reflecting a broader understanding of how nutrition influenced operational effectiveness. Feasts and communal meals reinforce social bonds and public identity, emphasizing abundance, hierarchy, and cultural cohesion. Excavations at Hedeby, along with written sources like the Laxdæla saga from Icelandic settlements beginning in 874, document elaborate celebrations featuring roasted meats, fresh dairy, imported delicacies, and fermented beverages such as ale and mead. These events demonstrated wealth, reinforced leadership, and communicated cultural values through both food and ritual. Archaeological evidence shows that high-status individuals consumed the prime cuts of meat, while common warriors supplemented their rations with preserved and locally available foods. In Birka, Sweden, mid-8th to late 10th century layers reveal extensive remains of fish, domesticated animals, and herbs, suggesting carefully organized feasting practices. The careful planning of feasts alongside campaign provisions reflects an understanding of how diet could influence morale, loyalty, and collective identity. The perceived image of Vikings as formidable warriors was intimately tied to their physical appearance and endurance, which in turn depended on their diet. Skeletal analyses from sites including Birka, Sweden, and Dublin, Ireland, indicate robust physiques and low incidences of malnutrition among men who consumed protein-rich diets of terrestrial and marine sources. Isotopic studies further reveal that seasonal variation, combined with strategic supplementation from imported goods, provided sufficient vitamins and minerals to support long-term health and combat readiness. Alcohol, consumed in moderation during communal feasts, contributed calories and reinforced social cohesion, which indirectly supported performance and morale. Trade and raiding expanded dietary diversity, introducing exotic ingredients such as spices, dried fruits, and imported cereals from the British Isles, continental Europe, and the Baltic. Archaeological evidence from Hedeby, Ribe, and Dublin indicates that imported spices like coriander, mustard seeds, and imported dried fruits were incorporated into bread and porridge. These elements enhanced flavor, supplemented nutrition, and emphasized status, illustrating the Vikings' capacity to integrate local and foreign resources to maintain both sustenance and social prestige. Modern reconstructions of Viking meals, combined with laboratory analysis of preserved foods, indicate that these strategies were effective in sustaining energy, endurance, and resilience under physically demanding conditions. Overall, the Viking diet exemplifies a sophisticated understanding of nutrition, preservation, and resource management, intertwining sustenance with cultural performance, operational planning, and identity. Archaeological, isotopic, and experimental evidence collectively demonstrates how dietary practices shape the warrior image, reinforcing the association between food, strength, and status in both daily life and ceremonial contexts. This legacy informs contemporary interpretations of Viking society, emphasizing that the effectiveness and reputation of Viking warriors were inseparable from the careful planning, preparation, and consumption of food that sustained them across Scandinavia, the North Atlantic, and beyond.